This knife has a straight edge on it, so it's very easy. And maybe in our world here, there lives a happy little mountain.
Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime videos, and I also discuss a lot of psychological experiment videos, horror films, everything like that, with a little bit of university and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Today I'm discussing another kind of experiment video that I've had so many of you requesting ever since I started doing these on my channel. We're going to be discussing the experiment known as Operation Midnight Climax, and also kind of the wider load of experiments that are known as MKULTRA. Less in depth about that and more focusing on Operation Midnight Climax, but it's all very interesting. It was a kind of covert load of experiments carried out by the CIA on unsuspecting participants, and it's all very fascinating. So if you want to hear a little bit about it, then keep on watching and we shall just get started. Operation Midnight Climax was the code name given to a covert CIA experiment that was carried out in the US between the 1950s and 60s. Like I said, it was part of a much larger group of experiments called MKUltra, and I'll go into a little bit more about like the other things that they carried out under this name. Full details about this experiment went unknown for quite a while until about 1975. A lot of information came out when the original files were listed as declassified, so people learned a lot about what they'd been, well, basically people had been tested on without even realising, and the public were aware of it. And then even more came out sort of later, in more recent years, when even more pieces of the original case files were declassified. The CIA essentially tested the effects of LSD, so the hallucinogenic drug, on unsuspecting members of the public, as well as a number of military officials through New York and surrounding areas for over a decade. The intention had been to sort of understand the effects of the drug as a means of them later adapting it and using it as a form of mind control and psychological torture. The operation came about in kind of the height of the Cold War, and there was rumours of their kind of enemy countries developing these psychological warfare means, and even some claims of mind control. So the US government kind of became quite desperate to gain their own methods and start testing the way to develop their own versions of the psychological warfare, just in case any of these rumours were true. In 1953, the head of the CIA approved what was known as MKUltra, which was not only one but a whole load of different experiments using different forms of drug on different members of the public, just to see if there was some that they could potentially use and develop as a new form of controlling human behaviour. So yeah, like I said, MKUltra is kind of the larger name, the larger group of experiments. There was over 150 experiments testing different drugs, not just LSD, and they were kind of varying from anything really, like I said, from LSD to heroin to even electroshock therapy. There are so many. If you want to look up other experiments, there are a lot, and it's all quite unsettling just how many were carried out and how drastic they were on these unsuspecting members of the public. Saying that, not all of the experiments were using unknowing participants. There were some that were formally advertised that they had volunteer participants take place in them. However, the majority were carried out on unsuspecting members of the public. And typically these experiments would be carried out in institutions that would have large populations that they had direct access to. So anything from universities to prisons, even to military bases. There were kind of ways of them getting into the higher up people, higher up levels of these institutions, and convincing them to carry out these experiments on their unknown population. There was no way of knowing exactly how many members of the public, how many unsuspecting victims in a way were used in these experiments, because not everything is declassified. A lot of the original files are still classified. As you can imagine, they are CIA run experiments, so we probably don't even know the full extent to everything. And also a lot of the original case files were lost when they were originally destroyed, when it all became public knowledge. But you can only sort of imagine that there were quite a lot of participants used. So Operation Midnight Climax in particular was one that falls under this MKUltra project experiments, and this particular experiment involved the CIA setting up brothels in their safe houses. So they would advertise these brothels and basically lure these unexpecting men to these brothels, thinking that they were going to just carry out their business with these prostitutes, but in reality they were being spied on. These unsuspecting men were then spiked with LSD, usually in their drinks, so they'd have like cocktails and things made for them when they arrived at these brothels, and they would be laced with LSD, and then while they were inside the houses they were observed against their knowledge through like mirrors and recording devices hidden around the room, so they were pretty much observed and drugged against their knowledge. Ultimately they had wanted to see if by spiking them with this LSD, with this hallucinogen, they could kind of prompt the men to confess things. So obviously these men wouldn't have any secrets to do with enemies of the war, but just general confessions of anything, because then they could develop this as a means of using against their enemies in the war, as a way of sort of getting these war secrets. So they kind of just wanted to observe these men to see how much they would share as a result of being drugged. And as I'm sure you've gathered by now, all these men were completely unsuspecting. They didn't know they were taking part in these drug tests, and I can't even begin to explain how unethical this is, like how ridiculously unethical this is, but because it was run by the CIA, it went on for so many years. When researching sort of just the MKULTRA experiments as a whole, there are a couple of names of relatively famous people that have become quite well known since taking part in their experiment, but they were people that volunteered for the publicly advertised experiments that fell under the MKULTRA branch. So there were two men in particular, Ken Casey, the author, as well as James Whitey Bulger. They are kind of the biggest names of well-known people now that actually took part in early drug trials in relation to the CIA. What I also do feel the need to mention to you guys is that obviously Operation Midnight Climax was a particular experiment that took place in safe houses, so there is that element of protection there. Like, as much as it's completely wrong, I don't agree with anything obviously, but they were in the safety and they were being observed by government officials. However, there were a number of experiments that were based on these unknowing members of the public being drugged with high doses of hallucinogens in public places and left to deal with the psychotic symptoms without any knowledge of why they're happening. So people would be drugged in the street and observed from a distance but not helped, which is completely disgusting behaviour. It's also actually believed that a number of prisoners who were in American prisons at the time that weren't actually American citizens, or at least one of fully American heritage, were interrogated as a means of fitting into some of these experiments. They would almost use their non-American nationality as a way of acting as though the drug tests were justified, because they were claiming that these prisoners had a secret knowledge of their enemies of war and that they had to use these hallucinogens to try and interrogate these information out of them, which is awful. Other experiments in Project MKUltra saw people going into like respected institutions, so healthcare centres, asking for treatments, just mild treatments to like things like mild depression. They'd go in expecting just typical treatment, but instead of receiving these adequate treatments, they would receive lethally high levels of electroshock therapy for things like mild depressive symptoms, which is insane. These experiments in particular led to an extremely unsettlingly high rate of induced comas, severe brain damage, even deaths, things that came about from these poor members of the public that had no idea that they were being given the wrong treatment. And any of the deaths in relation to any of these experiments, obviously, like I said, they are CIA run, so they were listed officially as suicide and nothing was looked into them. So this is how these experiments went on for so long. All in all, these experiments didn't particularly yield any impressive results. There was no justifiable reason, upon looking back on them, for them to be carried out. They didn't find anything groundbreaking, nothing new, and so there was really no argument to justify any of these taking place in the way that they did. The majority of people didn't know they were taking part in these drug tests. They weren't just being observed, but they were drugged, and it's just disgusting really that it went on for so long. So obviously there are a lot of other experiments I could discuss, and obviously I didn't go into too much detail in any of them because there is so much that you can look up. Obviously, like I said, we don't know everything. There's no way for us to know everything, but definitely give a read if you are interested in other like Project MKUltra experiments. It is quite fascinating that something so disgusting could be carried out. So yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. Like I said, there's loads to research. I by far did not cover everything, but I hope you still find it interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon for another video. Bye.